Hello, friends. So, we are going to be continuing our journey with The Weight of Our Sky, Malti's journey through 1969 Malaysia, a time period where a lot of race riots are going on. And I wanted to read a couple passages. There were a couple marked, not chapters this time, and just really dive into the literary aspects of this story. I am by no means an expert or experienced with this time period. So a lot of what we're going to be looking at is from a literary perspective. However, I always try to draw from the historical piece. And so to give some context, the 1969 race riots, I believe it was May, was the conflict between the Chinese and the Malaysians. And the conflict itself is complex, just like any other. There's never a simple answer to complex problems. But at the core of it, there is a lot of learned hatred, similar narratives that I even hear in the States. They took our jobs, go back to your own country. A lot of things that echo whenever there is racial tensions involved, violence that will explode, and a lot of it is politically driven. So I really wanted to just dive into some of those pieces, and again, literary perspective, looking at the literature, and how Hanna decides to tell this story is pretty powerful. So we're going to be looking at the mental illness aspect, right? Malti's OCD, as I've mentioned before, and that's definitely something that is not necessarily a choice for her, as we find out. And how this story is told, there's a lot of cool, juicy bits in here in terms of structure. So let's go ahead and look at, which one do I want to do first? That's always a tough one. Okay. This is a good scene. So this is about a third of the way into the book. And Malti has managed to get herself into a situation where she is now with a Chinese family. She is Malaysian, and so she is taking up refuge with them. There's a lot of, shall we say, mixed feelings about her presence there, considering the Malaysian government at the time has been persecuting a lot of Chinese at the time. So with this scene, basically, she's sitting at the dinner table with them, eating their food. Again, you know me, I love to talk about this aspect of how important food and the traditions surrounding food, they are so ingrained into cultures. That's kind of a universal thing for various reasons, depending on the culture that we're talking about. But in this case, this is not necessarily wartime, and I know I've said that in the past, but I mean, it could have easily broken out into such, but this is definitely a very tumultuous time. Right? There's a 24-hour curfew. There are local businesses being destroyed and ransacked, and houses being ransacked, and people are being killed. And the interesting thing about this, before I jump into this dinner scene between Malti and this Chinese family, is that the numbers of people who were killed on this time frame, a couple of days where these race riots were going on, there's a lot of mixed, when I was doing research on this, there's a lot of mixed numbers. Some people say there was 109 people killed in 48, 72 hours, something like that. Some people say it was more like in the 800,000s people. So we have to assume that the number is significant, at least over 100. When you're talking about rioting in that sense, where it is that gruesome, a lot of people, with being respectful, of course, have a hard time identifying the bodies. There you go. You know, buildings are being set on fire. So people trapped in the building, a lot of people just caught in the crossfire. So there's a lot of pain right? So we're just going to jump right into this scene, and then we're just going to jump right in and talk about it. Would you stop fidgeting and sit down? You are making me nervous. Auntie B implores me. So I sit up and tap my feet instead, 3 times a side, willing the time to pass quickly, and for Uncle and Frankie, yes, even Frankie, to make it home in one piece. We sit this way in silence for a while. Then, suddenly, Auntie B speaks. We used to live in Kampong Borough, you know, girl, years ago when the boys were both this small, she says, bringing her hands down to indicate a level just below her waist. Uncle had a shop there. That's where you live, right? I nod. Why did you leave, Auntie? Oh, you know. The Malays didn't like us very much. She pauses and thinks about this for a second. No, that's not true. They liked us fine, I think. They accepted us. We were a part of their scenery. We had plenty of customers. The boys had plenty of friends to play with. I think it was the idea of us that they didn't like. You know, La, they would never say it straight out. Malays are so particular about giving face. But once in a while, someone would joke about Panditong immigrants, or they would refer to us as you Chinese, laughing as they did it, or make pointed little remarks about outsiders stealing jobs. She sniffs. The phrases are familiar. I feel a distinct unsettling sting when I realize that I grew up with them, heard them so often they were reduced to nothing more than background noise, taking away our opportunities. Heathens, Chinese pigs, go back to where you came from. Malaysia for the Malays. Have I ever said any of those words? Do I believe any of it? The Jinn moves suddenly, rising from the depths, seizing this new idea gleefully. Maybe you haven't, maybe you will. Or maybe you already have. Haven't you? Have I? I shake my head a little, trying to dislodge that needling voice, then shoot Auntie B a quick glance to see if she's noticed. But she's still wrapped up in her memories. We didn't really mind too much, La. Not at first, she continues, a faraway look on her face, or at least we tried not to. You Malays have this saying, Di mana bumi dipyajak di suti lagi dijang. Please don't hate me. Do you know it? No, Auntie. It means where you plant your feet is where you hold up the sky. She smiles slightly at my confused face. Okay. That was 2 pages, so I'm just going to pause there. So, a lot to unpack in this passage, which is why I chose it. I think that this particular passage illustrates not necessarily Malti's OCD, that's kind of taken a back seat to this narrative, where Auntie B, the mom of Vincent, who we know is the Chinese boy Vincent that helped rescue Malti, she's articulating how ubiquitous the racism can present itself, manifest itself in everyday society. It starts out of these little tiny jokes and these jabs, things that if you aren't Chinese, they don't seem like they are a hurtful thing, but she's kind of creating this picture in the reader's mind where it starts off as this, and then this, and they never say it straight out, but it's just one jab after another. And then you see kind of the juxtaposed thinking from Malalti's stream of conscious, where she's saying, did I ever say these things? Like, I'm a kid, like, I never meant any harm, but I hear it from adults all the time, you know, Chinese pigs, they're taking our jobs. And so you're seeing kind of the irrational fear from the Malaysian perspective, and then you're getting Auntie B's perspective on how their words and how they choose to kind of externalize their fears onto the Chinese people, how that impacts them as a people, how they are made to feel like imposters where they're living, and how they don't really necessarily not like the idea of them, they just don't like the idea of them in general. They never say it straight out. So it's it's an interesting kind of back and forth that we are getting between Auntie B's perspective and Malolti's perspective. A really cool thing that Hanna Alkaf, the author, does frequently, where you get this, well, it comes off like this, but this is really how it's impacting the people. This is what hatred does to people. And this is just daily life. This is, kind of illustrating how it starts, and now we're in these riots. I think that the one thing that people will always ask themselves is, how could this happen? How could this happen? They always think that these extreme acts of violence just happen out of nowhere. And the author is saying, no, it's in here. The precursors to the behaviors and the actions, the violence against the Chinese, and in reverse, the violence against the Malaysians, because they are definitely killing one another. It came from somewhere. There was a kind of a buildup before it kind of overpoured. So I think that this is really important little scene. Again, simple activities going on. They're talking around the dinner table, and it's just illustrating something that I think that a lot of people in society, whenever these extreme acts of violence occur, is how did this happen? How did we go from this to this? And I think the biggest message that the author is trying to articulate in this sense is that we have to be very, not necessarily always being politically correct all the time, but we need to be a little bit more accepting, like actual acceptance. That they Miss Auntie B, her saying, they accepted us, but did they really accept us? So very, very cool, just way to illustrate hatred. I know that sounds weird, but it was just literally speaking, it was a very good way to articulate a very hard subject, a painful subject for her too. So I think another important thing that we see also from Malolti is she's giving her that space and that time to speak, despite the things that are going on internally with her. So that going forward is going to definitely play a huge role, without giving spoilers away. Her being willing to listen to their perspective when Frankie, the older brother of Vincent, he decides to join these riots and these fighting. Up until this point, he has kind of stayed away. But it's all going to play a part. Is that when we do a lot more listening than talking, a lot more unity can be formed, and a lot more can get done, especially in times of turmoil. So we're going to continue to reading on. The ending part, before I jump into the rest of the passage, the ending part is, of course, the namesake of the story, is where you plant your feet is where you hold up the sky, henceforth the title, The Weight of Our Sky, is, if I could give a meaning, an obvious interpretation to that title is that they have a heavy burden to bear, both for different reasons, both Malaysian and Chinese people. And they're going to talk a little bit about this, but something that I definitely took away from reading this is you have your burdens of your people, and you also have the burdens of wherever you're at. The environment that you're in and of itself can be its own burden. So we're going to continue reading on so we can talk about the title namesake. Where you plant your feet is where you hold up the sky. She smiles slightly at my confused face. Wherever you are, you must follow what the people there do. Their customs, their ways, she explains. So we did. We bit our tongues when people whispered things behind our backs, or made those sharp little comments to our faces, or even spit on our door. We paid along our fees regularly, so hooligans wouldn't cause us trouble. You know Along? I nod. Everyone knows Along. He and his gang rule Tampang Bureau, demanding protection money from residents and shopkeepers to keep their properties safe from harm. walking through the neighborhood with a swagger in their step, daring anyone to cross them. Nobody ever does. Along has a short temper and a long list of grudges and a very sharp knife. She sighs. Everyone did. We knew he asked us for more than our neighbors, but we paid anyway. No choice. What to do? That was our sky. Okay, so now we get a little bit more of the story and how when people are left to rely on their own brand of justice, this gang along, these people are paying them. Malaysian, Chinese, you name it, Indian as well. They're living in Malaysia at the time. Uh, this is what you get. So they are paying more because they're Chinese, and the gang is obviously probably of Malaysian descent, we can assume. And I think that they articulate that later in the story. And it's very difficult to be in a place and feel like have that imposter syndrome and still have to abide by the customs, rules, and followings of that place. Because there is this added layer of cultural nuance from the Malaysian perspective and traditions. And then on top of it, you have to also look at and interpret how they interpret you, and then your culture on top of it. So many people of Chinese descent had a lot working against them. On the flip side of that, Hanna Alkaf is a Malaysian writer, and there is a lot of, at the time, there were a lot of Chinese politicians that managed to get into office at the time. And of course, hate is the gift that keeps on giving. And so Chinese put some laws strategically in place, systematically in place to go against and prevent Malaysian progress, essentially. So there's these events and these characters are depicting impacts of the race riots and the political laws in place that are still long lasting. They are still affecting modern Malaysia today. So yeah, without treading into my own like political proceedings, there is a lot of echoing, as I mentioned before, with things going on in the States. There's a lot of systematic racism in place in terms of our law and our political standing in law. And it is hard to undo, just as much as is hard to undo in people's minds. The hate supports the laws in place, and it just feeds off each other, if that makes sense. So hatred has become a part of the culture. And I think that when people are living in larger countries like the US, we tend to think that we are special and that these problems don't exist anywhere else, but they do. And it's just different people, different place. So I really learned a lot just from reading Hanna's perspective on this in this particular passage. But another thing that I wanted to read about, oh goodness, there's so many good pieces in here. Oh my goodness, I don't even know. Oh, okay. So I think I'll read this piece right here. Okay, this is a little bit further into the book. This is halfway through the book. Vince finally has caught on to Malalti's OCD tendencies, the tapping, the organizing, the incessant patterns making, basically. And he's going to ask her, why do you do this? Why do you do this? Right? So we're gonna see how she articulates this to him. And it's really interesting, this conversation, because again, because there has been a lot of cleared air and space that she has allowed for these people to share their story and their suffering, and vice versa, she is now going to get to share some of what she is doing. And keep in mind, this is 1969. And even by modern times, mental illness is still one of those things that is not necessarily normalized quite yet. I think that it's normalized in conversation, but people normally acquiring regular help, whether that's through therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, um, any type of assistance, was not really readily available, much less practiced. Later, or yeah, there's a flashback later where Malalti is. We get to see what was the resources available. A lot of it was religiously charged. A lot of it was spiritual, like use these remedies, do this ritual. So she kind of has to find her own coping mechanisms. So we're going to see how this has been impacting her. And this is the first time she shared this with anyone besides her mother. So, why do you do that? My eyes fly open and I see Vincent looking at me. Do what? I say, my heart beating so hard I swear you can see it bouncing out of my chest, like some kind of cartoon character. How long have I been sitting here like this? How long has he been watching me? A dark shame begins to blossom from the pit of my stomach. Your fingers, they never stop, and I can hear you counting sometimes, under your breath. What are you counting? My face burns icy hot, my toes curl in agony. I let him see me. How could I let him see me? For one wild moment I consider lying, thinking up some story, anything to put him off the scent. But I'm tired of lying, of hiding all the time, of pretending everything is fine. The numbers are wearing me down. I'm sick of it. The jinn courses wildly through my body, screeching as he senses my impeding betrayal. How do I even begin? Okay, Malalti, deep breath. So, imagine your mind is a house. You fill it with things and people and ideas and thoughts that are important to you and worth keeping, right? He nods, not wanting to interrupt. Well, in my house, the back door sometimes opens all by itself, and uninvited people just let themselves in and get comfortable. They talk really loudly, they do whatever they want, and they never seem to want to leave. So far, so good. I keep going. Those strangers in my house, they aren't really me. But because they act like they own the place, sometimes it's hard to tell what I'm thinking is really what I'm thinking, if that makes sense. Okay? I can hear the hesitation in his voice, and it almost makes me falter. In my head, the jinn replays the memory of my mother's recoil when I told her my truth, over and over and over again. When I get stressed, when I get worried, when I find myself thinking about something that I don't want in my head, I sort of count things to help me calm down. I glance over at him to see how he's taking this. Does it work? He asks. Sure. Well, most of the time. Stop, the jinn whispers. Stop. He'll hate you for saying any more. I ignore him and forge on. I can't just count any which way. I have to count in threes. Threes? I nod. Yeah, that's the magic number. So everything I count has to be in threes, or the total has to be a number that can be divided by 3. Or if there's a bunch of things, I can only count every third thing. Sometimes I count words in books, or things people say, or the steps that I take. Sometimes I have to touch things when I count them, or sometimes I have to tap out my count, like with my fingers or my feet. My voice trails off. This is too weird. Even saying it, I know it sounds too weird. He's about to call me crazy, call a doctor, call Obama. Instead, he just asks, why 3? I shoot him a look. He actually seems interested. I don't know, I say honestly. I've thought about it a lot, and I think maybe it's because the last time I was happy, the last time my mind was quiet, it was when we were the three of us, a proper family. There, it's all out. Well, almost all of it. I can't quite bring myself to tell him about the gin, but even then, I'm new to this being honest about my mental and emotional state thing, and this is enough. I feel a strange combination of exhaustion, relief, and utter vulnerability, as though I'm naked next to him. Baby steps. Okay. So, she personifies her mental state as the house, right? Everybody has a house or their typical stream of conscious, their memories, their feelings, their emotions, their thoughts. It's all in the house, right? Things that people care about, people, places, things, yada, yada, right? Hatred. It's all in there. So, but for her, it's articulated as there's a back door that's open, and strangers or the jinn kind of just walk in and start essentially how I articulate or came to think of it as somebody is kind of writing in her thoughts for her. And we kind of get that a lot with the jinn being kind of the personification of her OCD, right? So he's the stranger. He's the one putting these gruesome, terrible Edgar Allan Poe worthy death scenes in her brain, and she has learned, and we kind of get a little bit of why this is, but the counting rituals, the organization, started off when she was a child, and in school we learn a lot of the time that we learn to count things, we learn to organize things, to learn background knowledge. Like we do this by learning colors, things around us, numbers, etc., letters. So she counts words, she counts numbers, she counts things, she organizes things. So it's all stemming from somewhere. But the biggest takeaway is that for her, this is a mental and emotional state of being, she says, that she knows is not quote unquote normal. She is not neurotypical. And she can equate back this magic number of 3 to her family, when it was a family. Like her father was killed in the last race riots because he was a cop. Mom's a nurse. Talk about stress. So now it's down to 2. And the interesting thing about the number 3 is the number 3 actually holds a lot of significant value in most cultures and faiths. I mean, I kind of latched onto that, especially for Catholics, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, that's the perfect Trinity, that's the perfect 3. So you're getting a lot of those religious undertones, and especially where in the flashback where we see her getting treated by these faith-based healing methods, again, there's a lot perpetuated at her that she can be fixed, it can be better. But as we know now, modern times, some of these things cannot be fixed. But that pervasive narrative of you can just be fixed, you're normal, you can just be fixed, fix you, it's you, all on you, is so heavy in her brain. I mean, talk about that's the weight of her sky. Like her essence, her being is always wrought with obsessive counting, obsessive compulsive disorder, hence the name. So is very, very great way to articulate mental illness. And I think that not to, again, I'm never trying to equate, but I think that the concept of the house as a way to illustrate the concept of the mind and how back doors can be opened or roofs can be blown off, like, is such a great piece of imagery for the reader. So, the other thing that I wanted to also touch on was, again, Vincent's response is allowing her to speak. He's listening. He is only asking questions that are they're short. It's like, why 3? Does it work? He is asking her questions not so he can learn more necessarily, but he's asking her to help her kind of almost tease it out for herself. it's not about him. He's asking questions to help her kind of along, help tell what it's like for her to have a brain that's OCD. So again, a really great demonstration of you give people the room, the space, the time, no judgment, and you'll be amazed at what people will tell you, what you will learn about a person. So this whole time, she's been just agonizing. And I think one of the things that I definitely reflected upon when reading this is in the beginning of the story, before the race riots occur, she is able to quell the jinn a lot more. But the longer she spends in this absolutely terrifying, awful, traumatizing situation where she sees dead bodies left and right, people are dying in front of her, all these things that are so like just not uplifting, um, upheaval of her life. She starts to unravel a bit, and henceforth she's got caught. So, and how sad for her to just be struggling so much. A situation like that would be absolutely triggersome for her, I have no doubt. So, because at the core of this is her father's death that happened during a riot. So, for her, this is like fishhooks in the house. It's bringing up old memories, it's bringing up old pain, it's bringing up her past, and it's triggersome. You know, when we think about as a special ed teacher, or when you think about students who have their antecedents or their triggers for their behaviors to be escalated, every kid's got one. And, you know, we're sticking Malalti in literally the worst situation she could possibly be in. And so to be met with understanding and contrition and the space to speak on something she's never been able to articulate fully herself and just kind of really reflect on it. I think she even talks about that a little bit. Is there's exhaustion, there's relief, but there's utter vulnerability when talking about this, as though she's naked next to him. And that's baby steps for her. She didn't fully articulate that there's this jinn looming around in her brain, and all the stuff that she's seen. She's seeing him die millions of times, and just all the horrific things that she sees. This was a very like lukewarm introduction into what it's like to be in her head. So yeah, and that, again, another powerful scene, which is why I chose it. And of course, the author does a great job illustrating what it's like to be in the mind of someone who is not neurotypical, and how exhausting it can be. So exhausting. So props to her. And his response, of course, is like super, like, he doesn't have to be supportive. He just has to be like non-judgmental. So anyway, we're going to move forward and we're going to finish up the scene because I want to at least read one more. I know, kind of glossing over the whole entire book, but I figured that doing passages, impactful passages, would be better instead of reading whole chapters. So here we go. This pause is stretching on for far too long now, and I'm aching to look at him, search his face for clues, ask him flat out what he's thinking. Don't look, Malty. The tips of my ears burn, and I rub them self-consciously as I wait for him to respond. That sounds exhausting. I strain my ears for any hint of disgust or pity, but amazingly enough, all I hear in his voice is compassion. It is. Is there anything that makes it better? I think about this for a while, trying to find the right words. Music, I say finally. Music calms me down. For my last birthday before he died, the word sticks in my throat, but I forge on. They bought me my own record player. And even though my mom can't really afford it, now that it's just the two of us, every other month she somehow scrapes together the money to buy me a new record. The memory of it brings up fresh tears. Mama and me at the record store, flipping through the latest releases, giggling over particularly garish album covers, shrieking with excitement when we find the perfect one. She sounds like an amazing woman, Vince says softly. She was, I mean is, I quickly correct myself. Gin got your tongue? The voice purrs, and not for the first time I wish I could strangle him. I look down at my lap dreamily and realize that I've been tapping and counting the entire time. Quickly, I stuff my fingers behind me and hope Vince didn't notice. The thing about a song is that if you break it down, it's all chaos, I say. Like there's all these different notes, different instruments, different sounds. It's a mess. But you add a beat and a rhythm, and somehow everything can come together and make something beautiful. I think that's what I'm trying to do. Find a rhythm for the mess in my head so that it somehow makes sense. Like the music piece. The music is what helps her disentangle and just completely address the disarray within her head. So, and I love how she articulates what music is. As someone who's like professional musician, I think that's a great way to articulate it. Music is one of those things that has always been deemed an artistic creative expression. And if you spend any time amount of time trying to master it with music theory and vocalization and training, you quickly realize it's a lot more of a quantitative skill than one might initially think. And she hits it right on the head is because of the rhythmic aspect, the tempo. There's counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So it's so cool that that's where she finds her peace. And a lot of people who have disabilities, a lot of people find solace in music as a way to calm down. Not just the sense that music can affect the mood, but music can bring us back to a place of comfort, a memory, a space. And as we find out later, there's select certain music that helps her with that. But it's the rhythmic piece, temporality and time, and all those other uh, kind of aspects or musicality that create method to the madness, where there's sounds and things that kind of don't make sense. The rhythm kind of all brings it together. And that's exactly what music does. And so for her head, it's almost like a timekeeper. So that was a really cool thing to be shared between the two of them. I liked it a lot. And of course, we also get another piece or bit of memory about how Malolti's mom, apart from the faith-based treatments, she scrapes the money to get her records so that she can self-soothe, essentially, with the music. So, and you hear about that a lot. During this time period, music was such a powerful healing tool. And I'm not just talking about in like Malaysia, I'm just talking about that time period in general. You know, in the States there we had our own race riots going on in 1969. And music was a driving force, still is, but it's just for this particular generation, music seems to be at the heart of so much, like healing, social commentary, just so many different things you could talk about. Um, And of course, she's a Beatles fan, so come on. Amazing. So later on, of course, in this driving scene, they're in the car, right? Another simple activity. He starts playing some music for her. So it's very sweet. I don't know, it can be heavily inferred if their relationship is romantic, but he is at the very least very caring and considerate friendship with her. Um, so there's that scene. And I think I might read a little bit more. Hmm. I don't know. I might save it for the next video because there's so much. Oh, no, 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 no. We have to read this one. This is a good one. Okay, so remember, Frankie and Vince, they're the two boys, the Chinese boys, that Malothi's been hanging out with. Vince is very accepting and sweet and kind. Frankie, he's older and he's a little bit more jaded, and therefore he is just has not been happy about her presence since day one, right? So fast forward to quite literally the end of the book is Maloti is kind of racing against time to survive. She's on a mission and she's essentially caught in the crossfire of like a all-out battle. Like one side Malaysian, one Chinese, and they're both going to come charge at each other. And this would be probably the pinnacle point where probably the most deaths occur in terms of the race we're at. This is about the end. I believe they lasted for a couple of days, not a week, maybe more. Don't quote me on that. But this scene, Frankie is with the Chinese riders, and he's going to go raise some hell. And Malalti's caught in the middle. And she is kind of gone through a lot of growth in this whole entire novel, being kind of forced out of her fight or flight. She's had to fight and kind of get out of her head, which is hard for somebody with mental illness. So we're going to see what she does, and it's pretty noteworthy. So it's a short passage, just to be polite to you guys. So I'm right in the middle of two angry mobs with weapons, not weapons, weapons, raised, poised to strike, all looking at me as if I'm crazy. Luckily, I'm used to that. Malalti? Frankie is staring at me, disbelief written all over his face. What are you doing here? You know this girl? The question comes from the man standing beside him, muscles rippling ominously beneath his plain white t-shirt as he hefts a large wooden club from one hand to the other and back again. Frankie sniffs. You could say that. You making friends with Malay scum now, Frankie boy? The man in white leers at him, and Frankie scowls. We aren't friends, he says stonily. Then how do you know her? A voice calls out from the other side, and a young Malay man pushes his way through the crowd, brandishing a parang. Did you try to hurt her, you filthy dog? An angry murmur rustles through the crowd. You keep your nasty hands away from our women. Stop it! I yell, and miraculously, they do. All eyes are on me. Deep breaths, Malalti. I know him because his family helped me when all the killing and the violence started. They are Chinese and I'm Malay, and they helped me anyway, because none of that actually matters. I look up at the brilliant blue afternoon sky, trying to marshal my thoughts. Di mana bumi diptyak di situ langsit di junjung. Have you ever heard this before? It means where we plant our feet is where we must hold up the sky. We live and die by the rules of the land we live in. But this country belongs to all of us. We make our own sky and we can hold it up together. Dang, girl. Civil rights activists in the making. So here we go. We got the echo from Auntie B's words. And how funny it was that Auntie B knew a Malaysian proverb. Again, knowing the place and the times, you just follow, do what the Romans do, right? So she is standing in the middle of these two angry mobs who are ready to butcher each other mercilessly. So, but she gets the courage, despite all the danger going on. And it's not explicitly in this passage that I'm reading, but she's got a couple of kids with her. She's managed to collect along the way in her journey. So she's really like sticking her neck out here. But she's saying to them, look, none of this matters. Like, they took me in, they helped me. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, and I love the imagery of the sky is brought in, right? There's the social cue to the reader, right? A lot of time, great authors do this, where the imagery is going to give us that signal about what's going to happen. Great way to tell stories, right? That blue afternoon sky is going to help her. It's been kind of a plot device throughout the whole story. The sky's been red, it's been dark, it's been like, right, giving that signal based on color, the sky, about what's going to go down in this plot wise. So it's blue right now. That really hasn't happened yet throughout the book. So this is kind of the post-storm, right? The sky is nice blue, it's afternoon. It's not black and dark and dangerous. It's not red, right, with violence and blood and shed. It's blue, right? So then Malati gives her speech, right? We have to hold up the sky, but she adds on her own little piece of it. She's like, we hold it up though together. It's not just you follow what I say you follow. It's we need to all do this together. We all need to be unified and live together, respect each other and each other's differences. Easier said than done, but she gets them all to be quiet long enough for them to escape. So those are all the pretty powerful passages that I had chosen from The Weight in Our Sky. I could talk endlessly about this book, and I think I kind of had held off on reading this in my videos because there are so many descriptions of violence, very grotesque, like I said earlier, very Edgar Allan Poe worthy descriptions of death and dying. But I felt that with everything going on right now in Ukraine, especially, it was time to talk about a story like this because it is definitely an echo of the past and something that we can learn from. And characters like Malati, who, you know, not neurotypical, they think very differently, ends up being her advantage in such a tumultuous time. So that is The Weight of Our Sky. I highly recommend you read it. I'd like to kind of look at the comic next. I don't really know how much I'm able to show of the actual comic without, you know, getting demonetized. So we'll see about that. Maybe I can just describe it for you. Hopefully encourage you to read the comic book adaptation because it's really good. But yeah.